spellings of common names. So a lot of what you would call English names, actually the spelling can vary. For example, if the name is commonly used in Scotland or Ireland, then quite often the spelling changes. And that is actually true with my own name. My own name is an Irish name, but the English version is spelt differently. Let's have a look at dates and numbers. So you'll be able to distinguish the difference between, say, 15 and 50, especially for prices. For example, £15.50. With dates and times, check you know the different ways of saying, for example, 31st of March, and things like 1:45 or 1:45. One good thing is that IELTS markers are not strict about how you write the date. So it's much better to write WD or FEB than to get the wrong spelling for Wednesday or February. Short versions of dates are okay as long as they are correct. For example, 31 March, 3103, March 31 or 3/31. And practice things like O or 0 for phone numbers. So when it comes to dates, American and British spelling of dates are different. Don't worry, both are okay on the IELTS tests. And when it comes to phone numbers, in British English, we would say O, but an American tend to say 0. So just be aware that both are correct. Corrections. There will often be a correction in part 1 of the test. So an example of this is here on Thursday evenings, and then there's a correction, no, sorry, Friday. They will always have an example of this in part 1. Make sure you write down the correction, usually the second answer you hear. This also often happens with spelling and phone numbers. Did you say 495 344? No, 495 334. And the speaker will use intonation to emphasize the correct number. They will say it louder, more slowly, and with a different pitch. Other tricks you might get in part 1, in the example above, there are lots of tricks where they check if you're listening carefully. So you hear, well, it's free for students, but otherwise it's £125 per year, or £25 if you've got a current student card from another college. Answer, cost to join per year without student card is £125. Another example you might hear, we allow 12 items borrowed at any one time if you're a student. However, it's only 8 items for members of the public. Answer, number of items allowed for members of the public is 8. A further example you hear, most people book 24 hours in advance. Sometimes you can get one with 6 hours notice. However, the earliest you can book a computer is 48 hours before you need it. So the answer is computers can be booked up to 48 hours in advance. And a final example, you hear the minimum fine is £1.50, but it can go up to £5. Answer, fines start at £1.50. All right, so as I said at the beginning, I'm going to include 1 or 2 bits of listening practice here. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, in a few seconds, I'm going to play you the first 10 questions of a listening test. So just wait 1 minute while I change over.
different recordings, and you will have to answer questions.
So you can now see the listening on the screen. And the first 5 questions are there. And then when the listening moves to the questions 6 to 10, it will change the screen. So let's go.
On what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a male insurance agent and a female client who wants to make changes to her policy. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Will be played first. Good morning. Tauber Insurance Company. How can I help you?
Good morning. I want to alter my insurance policy.
Is that for your house, contents, or vehicle?
My vehicle.
The woman wants to change the insurance policy on her vehicle, so vehicle has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5. Good morning. Tauber Insurance Company. How can I help you?
Good morning. I want to alter my insurance policy.
Is that for your house, contents, or vehicle?
My vehicle.
Can you give me the number of the policy, please?
Certainly. I have it here in front of me. It's ZQW 5009.
And what make and model of car is it?
It's a Mazda Marvel.
And what's the CC rating?
Sorry, what do you mean?
How big is the engine? Is it 1,500 or 1,800 cc, for example?
Oh, that. It's actually much bigger than that. It's 2,500 cc.
Thank you. Now, I just have to ask you a few questions to verify your identity. What name is the policy under?
Heathcote.
Let me just bring that up on the computer. Yes. Can I just confirm your first name, please?
Well, my first name is Lisa, but I'm known by my middle name, Marie.
Right. I see both here, but Lisa is the one I want for ID purposes. And your date of birth, Lisa? I mean, Marie.
The 22nd of August, 1955.
Correct. Just one more question before we get started. Can you remember the password on this policy?
Oh dear, I didn't know I had a password on it.
Everyone has a password. Would you like to take a guess?
Possibly it's my mother's name.
And what would that be?
Sophia.
Sorry, guess again.
All right. Oh, I remember now. It's my grandfather's name, Jack.
Yes, followed by some numbers.
1897, right?
Correct. Now we can get down to business. What exactly do you want to change?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, I think it's overvalued at the moment. Can we reduce the value by $5,000?
You mean bring it down to $15,000?
Yes, I'm sure it's lost quite a bit of value over the past year.
Done. Now, what's the other thing? Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Well, I want to add the name of another driver to my insurance policy.
Who is it?
His name is Samuel Michaels.
He doesn't have the same family name as you.
No, he doesn't. Is that a problem?
No, it shouldn't be, as long as he's over the age of 25. But we find it easier to get approval for family members.
Oh, he is family. He's married to my daughter. He's my son-in-law. And he's 28, in fact.
Good. And what would he be using the car for? Would it be business or social purposes?
Not really. You see, I've injured my right arm and I'm having difficulty driving. It's not an automatic. I have to use the gear stick. And Sam, that is Samuel, offered to drive me to my appointments and so on. He's a good driver and I feel safe with him, but I'd like to know that the car is still insured with him behind the wheel.
So that would be family reasons then?
Yes, I think so. Will my premium go up?
No, as long as you can provide us with a photocopy of his driver's license. A true copy. You know what I mean. You'll have to get someone from the Department of Transport to sign it, saying that he's seen the original document.
I think we can manage that without any difficulty.
Oh, and while he's at the department, he should ask them for a record of any driving offences, demerit points, that kind of thing. Only for the last 5 years, though. We're not interested in anything beyond that, but it's important that he has a clean record for the 5 previous years.
Oh, I'm sure that won't be a problem. Is there anything else you need?
Just the date for when you'd like this to take effect.
Today, if that's possible.
Yes, we can issue temporary cover from today's date, but full cover won't apply until we've received the paperwork and it's been approved.
What exactly is temporary?
He'll be covered for 2 full weeks, but it will lapse after that time if there's any problem with his credentials. That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Okay, so I will bring the answers on the screen in a few seconds. And there you see the answers on the left in section 1. So I hope you got all of those correct. As I said at the beginning, section 1 or part 1 is the easiest part of the test, and you need to maximize your score as much as possible. Let's go back to the slides. And section 2, let's have a look at this. So section 2 is a monologue. That means one person speaking. It's about an everyday social topic, not academic. Is usually a person giving information or instructions or directions. Often includes a map or a diagram. And in the example below, you will hear a guide giving advice to people visiting a farm. First of all, can you guess what might come in the gaps? Making predictions will help. And as always, check instructions. Here you write one word for each answer. So let's have a look at what you have to do. So you have to do a gap fill, complete 5 sentences with one word. And here is a dialogue, what the speaker actually says. And I've highlighted the areas where the questions will be answered, or where you will get the answers to the questions. So for question 11, please don't frighten or injure the animals. For number 12, do stay at a safe distance from the tools. For number 13, you're all wearing shoes. We always advise people to do that. And for 14, I don't think any of you have brought dogs with you, but in case you have, I'm afraid they'll have to stay in the car park. So if we go back to the questions, so number 11 is going to be animals, number 12, tools, 13, shoes, and 14, dogs. Things to notice in part 2 of the test. As always, the information is the same order as the questions. There is a short introduction to help you get used to the voice and the topic. There is what we call some padding in between each answer to give you time to get ready for the next gap. Try to recognize this kind of unimportant information and its purpose. It is designed to help you and give you some thinking and writing time, so don't let it distract you from the main answer. And in part 2, the speaker often uses synonyms. For example, don't frighten or injure the animals. The synonym being don't harm the animals. The key word often comes before the main idea. So you'll have to concentrate on the whole sentences to get the full meaning. For example, you're all wearing shoes. We always advise people to do that. So that refers back to shoes. Stay in a safe place from the tools, don't touch them. And brought dogs, they'll have to stay in the car park. So again, they're using reference such as they and them. And notice that all the answers here are plural nouns, so you absolutely must put the S at the end of the words. And getting confused between single nouns and plural nouns is often a reason for making mistakes in part 2. Maps. So part 2 sometimes has a map or a plan. So the first thing to do is make sure you find where you are. So in the listening, they will always say where the person is on the map. Quickly check the main locations. So it might be a car park or a new barn or a fish pool. Make sure you have found all the letters. So on this map, Here the letter A is off the main picture. Write on the map as you listen. So quickly write, for example, scarecrow. Don't worry about spelling because you don't need to write this word down on the answer sheet. So some students like to write abbreviations on the as they're listening, and then write the full word on the answer sheet. Also, don't worry if you don't know what the words mean. For example, maze, just listen for the word and write it where you'll find it. And before the test, practice the language of directions. So for example, turn left, go straight on, its opposite, next to. And also language and directions, British English is often different than American English. And on an IELTS listening test, they will always use British language of directions, not American. So let's have a look at the map. So the map does show where the person is or where you are. And places to identify are shown with a capital letter of the alphabet. And don't forget A, which is at the top of the map across the road. And to answer the questions, these are the places you have to identify. So number 15, the scarecrow, number 16, the maze, 17, the cafe, 18, black barn, 19, covered picnic area, and 20, Fiddy house. Now listen to my version of listening. I will go slowly because it isn't the real test. Now let me give you some idea of the layout of the farm. The building where you bought your tickets is the new barn, immediately to your right. And we're now at the beginning of the main path to the farmland. And of course, the car park is on your left. The scarecrow you can see in the car park in the corner beside the main path. It's a traditional figure for keeping the birds away from crops. But our scarecrow is a permanent sculpture. It's taller than a human being, so you can see it from quite a distance. If you look ahead of you, you'll see a maze. It's opposite the new barn, beside the path that branches off to the right. Just over there, the maze is made out of hedges, which are too tall for young children to see over them, but it's quite small, so you can't get lost in it. Now you can see the bridge crossing the fish pool further up the main path. If you want to go to the cafe, go towards the bridge and turn right just before it. Walk along the side path and the cafe is on the first bend you come to. The building was originally the schoolhouse, and it's well over 100 years old. As you may know, we run skill workshops here, where you can learn traditional crafts, like woodwork and basket making. You can see examples of the work and talk to someone about the courses in the barn. If you take the side path to the right here, just by the new barn, you come to the black barn, just where the path first bends. Now, I mustn't forget to tell you about picnicking, as I can see some of you have brought your lunch with you. You can picnic in the field, though do clear up behind you, of course. Or, if you prefer a covered picnic area, there's one near the farmyard, just after you cross the bridge. There's a covered picnic spot on the right. And the last thing to mention is Fiddy House itself. From here, you can cross the bridge, then walk along the footpath through the field to the left of the farmyard. That goes to the house and it'll give you a lovely view of it. It's certainly worth a few photographs, but as it's a private home, I'm afraid you can't go inside. So if we just refer back to the map, places we were talking about, and next, here are the answers. So Scarecrow is F, the Maze G, the Cafe D, the Black Barn H, Covered Picnic Area C, and Fiddy House A. So to conclude this section 2, part 2 of the test, I think if you get a map or a plan, it's a fairly easy 5 or 6 questions, but you must practice. If you practice, many students will get all 5 or 6 questions correct. Now let's move to some of the most difficult parts. So section 3. And what happens here? So listening to section 3, it's a dialogue. As 2 or more people discuss an academic subject, is often a student talking to another student or tutor, is sometimes an expert being interviewed on an academic subject. One thing they often do here, because there's 2 or more people, you will find they have different accents. So they tend to do a mixture of somebody from England with somebody maybe from Australia, or even possibly an American. Or if they're 2 people from England, they tend to be from different parts of the country, so they have different accents. And IELTS does that deliberately to make this section a little bit more difficult. So you need to get used to different English accents. So the normal rules apply as to all parts of the listening test. Read the title if there is one, read through the questions, anticipate answers, guess the gaps, check your spelling, avoid distractors, so that's when they give an answer, then change it, and listen for synonyms. And for the first points here, the rules, use the 30-second gap between each section to prepare for it. However, because it is usually a dialogue with 2 people trying to agree on something like how to prepare their project or presentation, how to improve the resource centre, how to write their dissertation, there are very clear signals and signposts that you need to train yourself to become more aware of. And these will lead you toward the answers. So IELTS tests are very carefully constructed by IELTS test writers. Each test has the same level of difficulty and challenge, and so they have to follow a fixed procedure with a fixed number of questions and a fixed variety of question types. And these are relating to a fixed number of topics. This is what makes the IELTS test results valid and reliable. So we hope. And for these reasons, when you analyse a lot of IELTS tests, which I do, you will notice very obvious signals that they use in order to give you thinking time and to give you the best chance of getting the answer. So in this lesson, I will show you what some of those signals are. So first point is emphasis. So look at the two sentences below. In which one is the information emphasized? So I decided to look through the catalogues. What I decided to do was to look through catalogues. Well, yes, sentence number 2 has the same meaning, but it is constructed differently to emphasize look through catalogues. In the listening below example, you will notice more examples like this. And my second target was to. My advice would be to. What I suggest you do is. So my second target was to is instead of then I, and my advice would be to is instead you should, and what I suggest you do is instead of you should. And you hear several examples like this in this section of the test. Ordering and numbering. So we've already seen one example above. And my second target was to. And there are others which keep you focused and help you to stay in the right place for questions. Well, we agreed on 3 main targets for me to aim for. The first one was to, and of course, the second target was to, and my third target was to do further reading on discipline. You can also see this in a lot of listening part 4 lectures. The speaker often introduces the topic by saying something like, there are 3 main points to consider, or there are 3 main types of. Let's look at fillers. Fillers that start at the end of blocks of information and help you to know when to move on to the next question. Because part 3 is always a conversation and the speakers need to start and end each point they make. A tutor might say, so, well, now, let's, to start new topics, and all right, great, oh yes, oh that's good, exactly, to end and move on. In reply, a student could use these structures, but in a more casual way. Yeah, sure, of course, okay. It is important to recognize the purpose of these fillers. They help you recognize when one question has been answered, and they tell you to get ready for the next one. Questions. This is an easy one to spot. There are so many times when the speakers ask a question in order to give you the answer. So could I just ask, what do you think I should call it? Well, I'd go for something like context review. When do you want that done by? I should aim for the end of term. When would the deadline be for that? My advice would be to get it done before you embark upon the research. University tutors have been trained to always give positive feedback first, followed by constructive criticism. Suggestion of areas that need work. We can see this happening when, as soon as you hear the positive, get ready to hear the negative. So very much on the right lines. I'd say your first 2 sections are spot on. I wouldn't suggest that you change anything there, but in section 3, You really do need to have questions on teaching experience. Great, and although you did make a reference to quite a few different writers, I think you should aim to cite more works written later than 2000. Negative tones and expressions. So the tone of voice, intonation, often gives you clues about positive, negative language, and these can help you in other parts of the test. For example, you are asked to find something that a student couldn't do. Well, I got hold, well, I got hold of the book and thought it was excellent, but I'm afraid I didn't manage to get hold of the essays about classroom management. You know, the ones about Simon Erickson. Another example is in the sentences. So this is not really an IELTS strategy. This is the nature of English grammar, where the main information of the sentence comes at the end of the sentence. So compare with German, where the main verb comes at the end. In many tests, a lot of the answers are at the end of the sentence. So you would need to recognize pitch and tone leading up to key words. So she's in the computer center. The second target was to draw up a survey checklist. You really do need to have questions on teaching experience. But I'm afraid I didn't manage to get hold of the essays about classroom management. Well, I'll go for something like context review. I think you should aim to cite more works written later than 2000. I should aim for the end of term. And my advice would be to get it done before you embark upon the research. So notice I'm really stressing. Sometimes my voice will go, intonation will go up, and sometimes it will go down. And I tend to pronounce the words a fraction longer. That's quite natural in English. The language of suggestion. So we've already seen a few of these, but notice how the use of I'd and other would conditionals give you the answer and or lead to the next question. You really do need to have questions on teaching experience. Well, I'd go for something like context review and so on. Introducing new points. So here are a few examples. So let's look at some new targets. We'll start by having a chat about your chapter 1. Now, as regards specific areas to work on. Other examples they might use will be with regard to, in regard to, as regards, as far as something is concerned, when it comes to, and moving on now to. And the last one is what we call rhetorical questions. So these types of questions are more likely to show up in section 4 lectures when the lecturer is talking about himself or herself. The lecturer will ask you a question that cannot be answered because it's a monologue, so that you know what's coming next. So for example, so why am I writing this blog? To help you with your IELTS test. Finally, let's have a look at section 4 listening. So this section is a lecture, has a topic related to key IELTS topics. It's usually a gap fill, so you your answers, you fill in the gaps in sentences or phrases. Requires practice with spelling and word formation, so quite often section 4 can be a spelling test. The normal rules apply to all parts of listening test. So read the title and so on. Distractors is often used in section 4. Now, one of the key skills in section 4 is keeping your place, as there's no pause in this part, and you're probably getting tired and starting to lose focus. As we saw in part 3, there are very clear signals and signposts that you need to train yourself to become aware of. And these will lead you to the answers. So, signal types, ordering and numbering, rhetorical questions and fillers, which we've all looked at on previous slides. Now you should focus on keywords and phrases. So after listening to the first 3 sections of the test for about 20 minutes, you finally get to section 4. Some students are now feeling a little tired and losing concentration. It can be easy to make mistakes and simply blank out for a few seconds. Therefore, focusing on keywords and phrases becomes important so you can match what is being said by the speaker to the questions. This will help prevent you from losing 1 or 2 possible marks. So I've had students in the past that have maybe got band 8 on a listening test, and they have been really disappointed because in part 4, section 4, they have blanked out and missed the answers maybe to a couple of questions. And if they had written down the answers to those questions, then that would have moved them from band 8 to 8.5. So even for students who are good at listening, it's something that can happen to you. Let's have a look at some listening tips. So it's a good idea to do practice tests. For example, using the Cambridge IELTS books in preparation for the listening exam. I think all the Cambridge IELTS test books are on YouTube. Actually, you can download them from there. Your score is not the most important thing when you practice. The important thing is what you have learned by doing the test. Were there any new words or phrases that you can learn? What did you find difficult? And did any of your questions trick you? Any of the questions trick you? In other words, what do you need to do to improve your score? So check how accurate your answers are. Be strict with yourself. Every grammar or spelling mistake is important. For example, if the speaker says the library has a collection of newspapers, you must not write collection of newspaper. Get into the habit of moving on. If you miss something, forget about it and move on. Always prepare for the next question rather than worrying about a previous question. When you are given 30 seconds to check your answers, use the time to look at the next section instead. If you want to get a better score in IELTS listening, the most important thing is to do lots of listening practice. You need to put in the hours. So what does that mean? It means to do the necessary amount of hard work. But let's use this phrase more literally by considering how many practice hours you are actually doing every day or every week. Do you know how many hours you are listening to English yesterday or last week. Maybe you should keep a record of the time you spend listening to English this week, and maybe you can try to increase the listening time next week. A person who listens for 10 hours of English per week is probably going to improve much faster than a person who only manages 30 minutes. So, part 1 is supposed to be the easy part of the listening test. It's always a simple gap fill exercise with basic information about some kind of booking or appointment. But does this mean you don't need to practice part 1? Well, the answer is no. I recommend doing lots of practice for part 1. You should be aiming for 10 out of 10 in this part of the listening test, because you will probably lose points in parts 2, 3, and 4. In fact, a good idea would be to focus only on part 1 until you regularly get 10 out of 10. Get as many of the Cambridge books as you can and do all of the part 1 questions. Don't move on to parts 2, 3, and 4 until you've mastered part 1. Are you doing these things? So are you doing the following things to prepare and practice for the IELTS listening test? So working us through as many of the tests in the official Cambridge IELTS test books, doing the listening test samples on the official IELTS website, analysing any mistakes that you make when doing the above tests, listening to different parts of each test several times until you hear and understand all of the correct answers, checking the written transcripts at the back of the Cambridge books. So do this carefully for any questions that you found difficult. Noting new words and any spellings that you got wrong. Listening to as much English as possible to improve your ear. Not just IELTS tests, but news reports, documentaries, talks, presentations, interviews, and so on. And if you're doing all these things, keep going. You might not notice it, but your listening will be improving gradually. Check your spelling. So here's an easy way to check your spelling for the IELTS listening test. Find the listening test answers at the back of one of the Cambridge IELTS books. Record yourself reading the answers aloud. For example, read the list below. The next day, listen to the recording and try to write the words down with correct spelling. Then check your answers. Spelling mistakes can affect your score in the listening and writing tests. If you have a problem with spelling, here are some tips. Type your essays and your computer will find your spelling mistakes. When writing by hand, use the dictionary to check difficult words. Keep a list. Write down any mistakes your computer or teacher finds. Memorize and learn difficult words by heart. Test yourself on words you've previously spelt wrongly. Never give your teacher an essay you haven't checked. If you find that spelling is a problem, you should work on it every day. Keep a notebook or posters on your wall. If you do nothing, you will not improve. There is no secret rule that you will suddenly solve the problem. Are you really working on your mistakes and learning from them? Whenever you make a mistake at a practice test, you have the opportunity to make a small improvement. But this will only happen if you analyze the mistake carefully, comparing your answer with the correct answer in order to understand what went wrong. Perhaps you made the mistake because of a particular word or phrase, and perhaps you misunderstood something or missed a key detail because you were stuck on the previous question. Or perhaps you couldn't keep up with the speed of the recording and the amount of information. If you want to make progress, you need to find out what the problem was. So take time to analyze your weaknesses and learn from them. And analysing your weaknesses and error correction is very much a system that's used in the British education system. And it starts in primary school at 4 or 5 years old. We are taught that from the first year of primary school. And I always focus on this with my students in class. Learn from your mistakes. And that is a good way to make sure you don't keep making the same mistakes in the future. Dates often confuse people. The question asks you for a date. The speaker gives you a day, month and year. For example, the 16th of July, 2019. That's another thing. A lot of British English speakers will say 2019. Same with Australians. A lot of Americans will say 2019. Both are correct, but be aware there's two different ways of saying the year. But the instruction tells you to answer with one word and or a number. So I agree that this can be confusing. However, my advice is simple. Write 16th July as your answer without the year. This is the answer that the IELTS people want. So make sure that you write the day, number and the month. Only put the year if the question asks for it, or if the instruction allows you to include more than one number. The most difficult thing about the IELTS listening test, in my opinion, is the fact that you only hear the recording once. And with this problem in mind, here are some practice tips. Start by ignoring the once only problem. When doing practice tests, listen to the recordings twice, 3 times, or as many times as you need. Just focus on trying to get the right answers. The next step is to listen only once, but give yourself extra time in the breaks. Take as much time as you can to read the questions carefully and underline key words before you play the recording. Finally, try doing tests under the normal time constraints, but check your mistakes carefully. Using the answers and the transcript and listening to the recording again to make sure you can hear the correct answers. So it's important to use the breaks well. There are breaks between the 4 sections of the tests, and there are breaks in the middle of sections 1, 2, and 3. First, you have some time to read questions 1 to 5. That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Some time means about 20 seconds or up to 40 seconds before section 4. And it's important to use this time to read the questions and make sure you understand them. Underline key words and think what kind of answer is needed. For example, number, name, noun, verb, single or plural noun. And ignore this instruction. Don't check the section you just finished. It's more important to be ready for the next section. If you're not ready when the recording starts, you'll find it very difficult to read the questions and listen to the answers at the same time. So use this time to read ahead. Multiple choice questions are often difficult because there is more to read and the speaker often mentions more than one of the choices. So here are a few tips. Try to read the questions and choices before the recording starts. Don't check your answers to the previous section. Use the breaks to read ahead. Underline keywords in each choice. The keywords are those that make the difference between meaning and choices. When listening, only look at the words you underline. Don't read everything again. And expect a trick. They often mention more than one choice, so be careful. And if you're not sure, make a good guess, then move on to the next question. If you don't have time to read everything, don't worry. Prepare as many questions as you can, then you'll do your best on the others. Remember that the best tip is this: do lots of practice. Now, you don't need a teacher to do a listening test. The only technique that students need to get used to is reading ahead, using the breaks to read the next section of questions before the recording starts. Apart from that, it's a matter of practice. Listen to as much English as you can, do as many Cambridge past papers as possible, and analyse your mistakes carefully. You don't really need a teacher for this. People often ask me whether compound nouns should be written as one word or two. For example, do we write seafood or seafood and clubhouse or clubhouse? Many students do not know that an easy rule exists. So look at the following 3 rules for compound nouns. So for nouns with 2 syllables like break up and set to, the rule is easy. Use a hyphen only when the second word has 2 letters. If the second part of the word has more than 2 letters, it should be spelled as a single word, like coastline or bedroom. If the noun has 3 or more syllables, it is 2 separate words, like bathing suit or washing machine. So these rules tell us that seafood and clubhouse should be written as one word, because it is rule 2 that applies. So, another list of more tips, some of them I've covered previously. I'll just give you a few seconds to quickly look at those. Let's just quickly go back to section 3 for some general practice tips when practicing at home, not in the test. Do as much multiple choice practice as you can. Practice multiple choice questions in isolation. In other words, when you're working on multiple choice exercise, don't do any other type of question. Work only on multiple choice. Create your own collection of multiple choice exercises. For example, if you have several of the Cambridge test books, you photocopy all the multiple choice sections and put them together in one document. This will make it easier to follow tip 2 above. Analyze your performance very carefully. So, try listening to each multiple choice recording without looking at the questions. Stop the recording anytime you don't understand something or feel you're not really following what the speaker is saying. Before you worry about the questions, it's a good idea to assess your own listening ability in this way. Perhaps your ability to understand and follow fast speech needs work. If you have problems when you listen without the questions, you need to increase the amount of general listening practice that you do. In other words, your brain needs more exposure to the English language. If you don't have a problem understanding and following, point 1 above, you can start doing the practice exercises. Add variety to your practice. Here are some possible practice exercises. And again, I'll just leave that on the screen for a few seconds for you to read. And then, again, a few more tips. So in class, I focus a lot on section 3 because I find that a lot of students who are new to IELTS find section 3 really difficult at first. And then finally, let's have a look at section 4 tips. So it is the most difficult part of the listening test for the following reasons. There is no break in the middle of the 10 questions. You hear one speaker giving a fairly long talk or lecture. The speaker will speak quite quickly. A wider range of vocabulary is used compared to the other sections. Don't worry too much about this section. Spend most of your time practicing sections 1, 2, and 3. Try to get as many points from the other 3 sections as you can, and this will allow you to lose points in section 4. Remember, you can make 9 mistakes on an IELTS listening test and still get a band 7. And most of those mistakes will be in sections 3 and 4, not in sections 1 and 2, which, if you've done plenty of practice, you should find pretty easy. As I say to my students, sections 1 and 2, you should be able to get 18 correct out of 20, which means to get a band 7 for sections 3 and 4, you would need to get 13 correct. That means 7 mistakes. And as you practice more, maybe you can reduce the number of errors and move up from band 7 to band 7.5. So we're coming to the end. Thanks for listening. As usual, if you want a copy of these slides, then they are available from GLN. Next week, we are going to be looking at Task 2 writing. I will probably focus on the 2 writing question types that are these days happening a lot more on the test, which is how to answer a 2 views question and a 2-part question, the 2-part question. So thanks for listening. I hope you found this useful, and hopefully that you will sign in to next week's presentation. So thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Terry. Rất là cảm ơn các bạn đã tham dự buổi workshop ngày hôm nay cùng với cả chuyên gia Terry Wilson. Thầy hy vọng là thông qua cái buổi workshop, buổi học ngày hôm nay về IELTS listening thì chúng ta có thể thu được những cái kiến thức bổ ích để có thể cải thiện được cái phần điểm nghe của mình trong bài thi IELTS. Đặc biệt là cũng ở khung giờ này vào thứ Bảy tuần tới thì buổi học chúng ta sẽ bước sang buổi thứ Bảy với chủ đề là về IELTS Writing Task 2. Thì mình hy vọng là mọi người có thể có mặt đúng giờ để chúng ta có thể tham gia cái buổi học mà mang cái kiến thức vô cùng quan trọng và Đối với một số bạn là nó cũng khá khó là về chủ đề writing. Thì chúc các bạn có một cuối tuần vui vẻ và hẹn gặp các bạn vào buổi workshop, buổi học trực tuyến vào tuần sau cùng với cả chuyên gia Terry Wilson. Bye bye Terry.
Bye bye.